Hello and welcome to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Hadoke, exercise my little grey cells whilst commentating on a particular episode of Doctor Who, and my special guest will name their favourite things about it. I have to guess what they are.
Thank you, Toby, for asking me to come and speak to you about my favourite things regarding the Ark. My name's Mark Aldridge and I'm Associate Professor of Screen Histories at Solent University in Southampton, and obviously a big Doctor Who fan, as most people who love screen histories tend to be.
Welcome to this edition of Happy Times and Places, and I, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest, Mark Aldridge, are plague carriers. We are carrying to you, two by two, the second episode of The Ark, in which there will be lots of medical stuff going on aboard a spaceship that's got a jungle and some one-eyed lizard bipeds in it, only in Doctor Who, as well as the destruction of Earth and some musing on the nature of man. Oh, yes, why don't more people talk about this story? Well, talking about the story have been some of the contributors who listen to this podcast because they get it early on Patreon, patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, and they have been coming forward with their reactions to part one and the podcast on part one of this particular unsung Doctor Who adventure. So let's see who's been watching along and giving their opinion. Steve White says, "Oh, this is going to be interesting. I've always found this to be a divisive story amongst fans. Full disclosure, I love it. I'd say it's a guilty pleasure. But no Doctor Who is really a guilty pleasure. The sets look fantastic, and the use of animals in the filmed inserts gives the production a sense of scale. However, things do fall down when it comes to characterisation. The future humans are absolutely useless. I can't help but be reminded of Hitchhiker's Guide and the Gulgafrinchans, who shipped off the redundant and useless section of their society, telephone sanitisers, insurance salesmen, account executives, etc., under a ruse that their planet was going to be destroyed. The humans speak in that particular 60s sci-fi manner, with lofty pseudo-Shakespearean dialogue delivered in the hammiest manner. Monoids are a very ambitious costume design for the 1966. To my mind, they come across as quite unsettling in the first two episodes, a constant alien presence standing in the background. Whilst they are not described as such, it's clear from the start they carry out all the labour-based tasks on the Ark, whilst it's not clear exactly what the humans do all day. This is Doctor Who at its most B-movie-ish, and I love it. Shame the monoids turn out to be just as incompetent as the humans in later episodes, though. Are we having the debate about servitude in these earlier episodes, or are we waiting till it gets more prominent in the last two parts of the story? I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, because people do have a reading of this story which could bring its morality into question. I'm interested in hosting the debate. I'm sort of fairly even-handed about it, I think. Frank Shale says Douglas Adams surely had these in mind when he came up with the B-Ark. We know he was watching at the time. He pinched the cricket scene from the Daleks' master plan. If only we'd had Earth consumed by a giant mutant space goat. The Gulgafrinchans is, of course, a fantastic idea in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The idea, yes, of there'd be a number of people who work in television who would be on the B-Ark, although they would have probably prevented it from taking off, and then rewiring it at the last minute so that it veers off course. Anyway, that's for no reason at all. I just go, I don't really like the way that this engine looks, so can we take it apart and put it back together again really quickly? Even though you've actually spent months perfecting the engine. Jack Sharp says, Toby, I expect a full profile of that elephant when too much information reaches this story. Yeah, she might be dead by then, Jack. But no, I did actually spend an evening trying to work out where Monica the elephant was. Of course I did. I really like the Ark, says Adam Parkin, and my first experience was when the official VHS came out in the early 2000s. It impressed me with its live animals on set, the two-part structure with time travel and the unexpected effects of our time-travelling team, the underplayed way the Earth is destroyed, the look for the monoids. I always like when they push the limits of budget and creativity with alien design. It feels a strongly science fiction story, so it's interesting that it's followed full-on by fantasy, then a comedy historical, before coming back to hard sci-fi again. When I watched the arc with my wife, we were watching through all Doctor Who from the start in order, something I've never done before, as she had mainly only seen Modern Who. Adam, your wife is a keeper. Shirley has watched some of the Seeds of Doom, and I think that's it. William Hartnell, she's watched some New Who as well, but no, she's not watched. She hasn't even watched all of Quatermass in the Pit. She's bad. She's a bad person. She's a terrible, but she's not really. But she's not. I want to marry Adam's wife. You heard it here first. William Hartnell had already become her favourite Doctor. Oh my goodness! And she really liked Dodo. Okay, well we might have a domestic about that. And identified with her as an interested idiot. Her words. That's a good idea. And identified with her as an interested idiot. Interested idiot is a very good description of Dodo, meaning a curious person who isn't knowledgeable about the things she investigates. I like that. That's a really good description of Dodo. Frank Shales comes in and adds, although Ben and Polly forcibly replaced Dodo and seemed to be what Innes Lloyd and Jerry Davis imagined to be grown up, at least mature teens post-schoolers, Dodo did feel a bit of a prototype that they were trying to mould into a with-it Merseybeat era girl after some false starts with companions from eras other than modern-day Earth, Sarah Kingdom, Katarina, and one huge success with Stephen, albeit no longer required as the new producers wanted to revamp the show. I have a huge fondness for Dodo as a character, quite apart from Jackie Lane, who is clearly wonderful. Adam Parkin says, thanks Frank, both my wife and I wish we could have met Jackie Lane to tell her we appreciated what she did on Doctor Who. Well, I met Jackie Lane on a train, as you know. I think that Frank makes a good point, because I'd gone for the physicality of, Elfin diminutive Susan, Elfin diminutive Vicky, Elfin diminutive Dodo, but we do have I would question whether Katarina is really a companion, and indeed Sarah. Sarah doesn't even get companion. Oh, does she? Anyway, let's not get into how the billings work. But Sarah's in one story-wise. Brett Vian not a companion, but we won't get into that. But I take your point, and that actually, yes, there is something rather 60s about Dodo that she's contemporary and with it in a way that Vicky and Susan are not. So yes, they are a way of she is a way of getting a gateway into the sort of swinging 60s that the a hipper character. She is a bit and I think she was up for the Rita Tushingham role in a Taste of Honey, so she's clearly giving that vibe, and that's drilling into something very contemporary and very 1960s, and I think if she'd been better realised, that would have given quite an interesting dimension to the show. But instead they go I think they try for the same kind of thing but with different types of characters with Ben and Polly. I think that's a very good point. And then we have Joe Llewellyn, who says, I've only watched this once. Joe, a reminder, is a viewer from across the pond. He's an American gentleman. I've only watched this once, but I quite enjoyed it. The direction was a step up than some of the other stories of this time, and the use of time travel was ahead of its time. I'm listening to this as I type this. You can go from the enlisted ranks to... and this is where I go off on one as in terms of Doctor Who not understanding ranks in the military. You can go from enlisted ranks to the officer corps. Richard Sharp started as a private. Yeah, but I'd say he's an exception. And I don't think that the brigadier was intended to be somebody who'd come, made that unusual step. There's a class thing here in Great Britain, Joe, I'll have you know. Lethbridge Stewart is clearly of good stock, in inverted commas, and would not have entered the army as an enlisted man. He would have gone to officer training school and entered as a second lieutenant or whatever. Now, come on. My wife's cousin will be going into officer candidate school later this year after serving as a private and sergeant, even after being out for a while. Now, when they mentioned a Corporal Lethbridge Stewart in flux, that was bullshit. Yeah, right. Thank you, Joe. Yes, indeed. The brig was never an enlisted soldier. It's all in the attitude. I said class, you say attitude. That's what divides us across the pond, Joe. Mustangs an informal name for prior enlisted officers. Joe, by the way, is a military man and is very much our unofficial, unpaid military advisor on this podcast and indeed the world of Doctor Who fandom. He's a good man. Mustangs, the informal name for prior enlisted officers, generally have a different attitude, less formal, lacking the implanted stick up the backside. We call going for a commission crossing over to the dark side, in jest, of course. I guess the Corporal, Lethbridge Stewart, says Frank Shales, who's answering everyone. This is exciting. Frank's always got a good perspective and was obviously having a correspondence day. I guess the Corporal, Lethbridge Stewart, was either some weird time disruption, a flux, if you will, or Robert Bathurst's character being an idiot, which, to be fair, he was. I love Robert Bathurst, though. I bet there was a Major Benton about at the same time. Joe Llewellyn comes back. Time disruptions can cover a lot of mistakes. It's mostly the writers or producers don't have the time or inclination to do the research to get it right. The worst was the Colonel in the Monk trilogy wearing the 4 stars of a general and wearing a pretty poor-looking uniform. But hardcore Doctor Who fans who also critically look at how military is portrayed are rare, and it's not just Doctor Who. Buffy's version of the military in Season 4 had me rolling on the floor. Yeah, but I just think something as basic as that, because there was a Sergeant Mike Yates in one of the New Adventures books, wasn't there? That's to me, people. I mean, you can pick up from Doctor Who itself how military ranks work, but it means that the people involved haven't even looked at any other sort of military programming or anything before they've started, which I think is. I think it's basic stuff that, and some mistakes don't matter, and some can be deliberate contortions of reality in order to make a dramatic effect. But those things just seem to me to be a little bit sloppy and not grasping the basic fundamentals of the ballpark that you're playing in. Frank Shale says, sometimes fandom has no taste. We're back to the Ark now. I love this story, not least because 4 to Doomsday, which I also love, practically remade it. It looked like Terence Dudley had only ever seen one Doctor Who story when he wrote the latter as Peter Davison's first-to-be-recorded serial. Monoids or monopticons, a shrunken-on-slides population of billions, mysterious plagues, green lumpy aliens lording it over subservient humans, the preservation of Earth culture through centuries, travelling in the void between Earth and an alien planet. One of the planets being a refuge for refugees, Refusis, a very Terry Nation-y. The impenetrable black box of the TARDIS piquing the Ark leader's curiosity. There's even a little side trip of the TARDIS to and fro and back again in the middle. And if I couldn't love the Ark more, as you pointed out, Russell Skane's dad is in it. The John Wiles era is where Doctor Who grew up into adult SF in my controversial opinion. It's certainly different. Until 4 to Doomsday, anyway. Darcy Smart, hello Darcy, says, all I can say is I've always found this an extremely endearing story. Best ever? Obviously not. But I've always had a great time with this, despite some glaring flaws and a bit of a lame second half. This is interesting, isn't it? Most people who like this are suggest that it doesn't quite work in its last 2 episodes, which we will get to. So that means we're probably in for a lot of fun today, though. I'm always entertained by it. The direction and set design overall are quite ambitious and definitely a bit underrated. Paul Michael Imeson, he does a good job here, and it's a shame he got let go. The impending cliffhanger in Part 2 really got me first time around when I saw it 10 years ago. Bring on the security kitchen. Jason Thompson says, I love the Ark too. It has a great premise, some fantastic sets and direction, and some superb visuals. The slow pan up to the statue at the end of the plague is a great cliffhanger. Then, in the return, after years of considering if the TARDIS arriving or departing was worth the time and effects budget to show on screen for any given story, they use similar effects just to show some vegetables appearing in a bowl to show this is a kitchen of the future. But you've already alluded to the rather limp cast and strange costumes. And then in the second half we have the absurdity of a security kitchen. The Monoids being so bad at hiding their evil plans because they won't shut up about them. Are they still excited to have the power of speech now that they have to talk all the time? A rather handy super strong alien to fix the problem at the climax, and of course the legendary exchange, "What do you mean? Are you up to something?" No. All of these are sadly perhaps more memorable than the many positive things, which may explain why it is less highly regarded generally. Jason's always pretty on the money, isn't he? Another thought. Having recently heard your musings on the war games in colour, do you think that the rather wonderful scene of the Monoid emerging from the jungle is helped by being in monochrome? I can't help but wonder if the Monoids would have been as inconspicuous in glorious full colour, where we could maybe make out variations in the exact shade of green of the monoids and the foliage. Well, I mean, I suppose if we were to colour it, we could colour the monoids to fit in with the foliage. We could even make them, Jason, like chameleons. Do you hear me, Ben Cook and all the others, Aaron and everybody who's been on it? Rich Tibble, that's how you do it. So when you come to colour the ark, I want the monoids to change colour depending on where they are, so that they blend in with their environment. That would be really sexy. Stephen Witowski says, your advocacy for the episode, Toby, sent me scurrying to iPlayer. This is only my second watch, and I was very impressed. The direction is excellent. That long tracking shot at the beginning is especially impressive. I also like the monoid reveal and the use of crane shots to emphasise the vastness of the spaceship. The story moves at a cracking pace, and the episode flew by. Yes, Eric Elliott isn't that impressive. He reminded me a little of Boris Karloff. He is facially not unlike Boris Karloff, although he's not quite as imposing physically. He rather shuffles, doesn't he? Now, he would have been great in the part. Imagine Karloff in Who. Yeah, that would have been amazing, but then we probably wouldn't have had space potatoes, because I think they saved the money on the actors for the space potatoes. Anthony Carroll says, another great listen. I feel the arc is very much two parts. The first part is better, as monoid's too comical in last two episodes. Some great special effects, though. And Michael Sheard. Yep, he's not till episode... Oh, no, yes, he's this episode. He is in this episode coming up. Oh, what an auspicious moment we are about to have. And Mark Trevor Owen says, I'm very happy to see the arc getting some love. Re Leslie Scott, I have a very vague bell ringing that A. Leslie Scott was one of the writers of the absolutely deranged stories in the Doctor Who annuals of yore. They usually went mercifully uncredited, but I think a compilation volume, Journey Through Time, listed the writers, including Leslie Scott. I could be barking up something so wrong it isn't even true, but it's a possible line of inquiry. Yeah, it is. There is a Leslie Scott mentioned, but I think we've worked out that it's unlikely to be the same person. In fact, because there's a Leslie Scott, writes for the I think the Doctor Who annual 1986, by which time we already didn't know what had happened to our Leslie Scott, so she wouldn't. And I think we've established too that Leslie Scott was not a writer. She, there was something else going on there. So she for her to have turned up later, and if it was a less sort of pedestrian combination of names, there's many a Leslie and many a Scott, so therefore likely to be many. If it had been Leslie Amagon, Thunderpants, Scottovlog, we would go, well, there's only one of those, so yes, it's the same person. But Leslie Scott, a bit like Dave Carter and various other people, harder to nail down and say that one is definitively the same. And I would put very, very good money, not that I have any, but I would put any money I had, which very much, on those two Leslie Scotts not being the same. And I think I did look into it a while ago and was very satisfied. But no, you're correct to invoke that, because there is that commonality of name in terms of writers, one credited for the arc and one in a Doctor Who annual. Who is indeed, your memory is correct, in the Journey Through Time volume, Leslie Scott is listed as a writer. Righty-ho, folks. I would like us... I'm sort of enjoying the fact that most of the correspondents have said that they've been enjoying it. I would like to hope that my enthusiasm is infectious. And let's see if we can continue spreading the infection during episode 2 of the arc, which is called The Plague in 3, 2, 1. It's amazing you can do this stuff at the touch of a button. I do have it on DVD. I have kept all my DVDs, and I will keep all my DVDs when this comes out on Blu-ray, although I suspect that will be some time yet, because we do have to work out what's going to happen with season 3. I say we, it's nothing to do with me. Anyway, I'm interested in the description of hammy acting. I've always considered hammy acting to be sort of rather theatrical, but I think Inigo Jackson, which I think is rather fun, it's a style of acting that is competent in what it means to be doing, whereas Inigo Jackson, I think, is aiming for Yes, he does it slightly differently here. He directs the all of us at the at, at the crowd, and they react a little bit. And I don't think he quite did that in episode 1. Yes, it is Tristram Carey's Daleks music, isn't it? So I presume you don't have to pay the same for a piece of music that you've already used. But I think he's aiming to be, because I think you could do that speech hammily, and it would be quite sort of Shakespearean, but good Shakespeare, sort of rich and declamatory, and you could kind of get away with it. I think he's maybe aiming for that and doesn't quite have the cojones for it. But I suppose that does count as hammy acting, but rather under-seasoned ham. Unlike, I always think of the Edward Petherbridge description of Graham Crowden, who said, "Graham, you're always a ham, but you're always perfectly cooked." And I love this idea that the TARDIS crew have brought the infection. And this is quite fun, that she's really crying this time. Oh, and the Doctor doesn't quite know what to. I love William Hartnell's reaction to that. The fact he sort of rather lamely looks to Stephen for help, and then he goes against this idea that he's crotchety. He's actually very sweet there with Dodo. I actually think the Doctor and Dodo have quite a nice rapport. This sign language is certainly not BSL, but that's fair enough, because sign language, changes from. Even changes from region to region, but it certainly changes from country to country. And there are no hard and fast rules with a lot of things. So the sign language for my name, for example, is not. There's not a sign for Toby, and you have to invent signs for things like Dalek assignment. There's a whole bit for it in my show. My stepson stole my sonic screwdriver. Anyway, here we have lots of sort of film sequences of monoids dying, and it's quite unusual that you get decent. This is where they really. This is always a bit like when the news says. There has been a plane crash in Singapore or whatever, and 150 people have died, including 2 British people. Now of course it's understandable that, because the people watching have an investment in people from their own country, but it always does seem a bit like 148 of them were less important. Yay, Michael Sheard klaxon. I love the fact that Michael Sheard doing perplexed Doctor acting here, which he does very well. We forget with Sheard, because he was such a ubiquitous presence, and because he became a bit of a joke latterly. You may not remember this, because he appeared at all the conventions, so places like SFX made his ubiquity seem like sort of desperation, or turn up to the opening of envelope. But actually what he was doing was he was making us fans very happy by throwing himself gamely and wholeheartedly into the extracurricular stuff, to the extent that he wrote about 75 autobiographies, but his first one's really good. I have a signed copy of it, because he came and performed at the Fab Cafe in Manchester, where I got a little drunk. Anyway, let's not get into that. But Michael Sheard klaxon, it's great that he appears at the sort of, I guess, fairly early on in his career, because you wouldn't expect him to appear in 60s Who, I suppose, because he's so ubiquitous in the 1970s, that it's great that he gets Hartnell under his belt, because it's a bonus Doctor, really. I'm not surprised he appears with Pertwee, Baker and Davis and all that. Still a pretty impressive run, and then comes back for McCoy for that cameo in Remembrance. Well, slightly more than a cameo, but I consider his William Hartnell appearance a bit of a bonus. That's unfortunate. I hadn't noticed before that, because they're playing the drums for the funeral. Now this is quite funerary music. This isn't Tristram Carey. This is special funerary music for the monoid funeral. But Dodo says, rather unfortunately, it's like savages, because I suppose at the time they would associate sort of natives with banging the drum. That was the fairly sort of simplistic view that we had. But that's considering some of the conversation that we may have a little bit later, that is an unfortunate parallel to draw. However, look at that beautiful crane shot up that had, and as I was saying before about it's not usual in the 60s that you get too many sort of lingering shots on monsters, I would say. And when you do, they tend to be of the robotic kind. And I think, which are slightly easier to pull off because they have to look slightly sort of mechanized and built, if you like, even though we're fortunate that the Dalek design and Cybermen design are so very good. But actually to have organic monsters that are 100% not human in full view, I would say there's not a more convincing creature in the 60s. These are better than anything on Vortis. Hello, Roy Spencer. He's got lovely diction. He's a very well-spoken actor. Turns up as Frank Harris again in Fury from the Deep. But look, and we even have a shot of that flying into space, which of course comes in very useful later in the story, but allows for a really good effect there. That's a brilliant effect, and it's helped by the fact that it's on the screen. But I rather like the fact that some of the effects aren't like, here we go, here's an effect shot front and centre, look up this sexy money shot of the effect shot. It's like, yeah, this is on a screen. Oh, here's some potatoes. They're actually sort of casually sprinkled into the story, which I rather like. So here, yes, Roy Spencer, who exudes goodness. He's a very cleanly spoken, lovely fellow. But I did do a commentary on, I think, this episode for Phantom Films for part of their Who Talk series, and at one point, Roy did say to me, "So who are you in this?" And I was like, "No. I'm here to facilitate the conversation. This was on 8 years before I was born. Thanks, mate." There's something slightly nasal about. He is a bit Ed Miliband, old Inigo Jackson, and I didn't know where he'd gone when we did the commentary for this. He was one of those actors that had sort of vanished, and I don't think IMDb was particularly complete at those points, so we weren't quite sure where he was. But he died in 2001, so but we didn't know that at the time. He was somebody that we had an eye on, keeping up. But his and Doctor Who deaths were being reported by then. He'd flown under the radar, rather, but we wouldn't have been able to get him. Whereas Kate Newman, here she is on the screen here as Mellium. Are you out there, Kate? Or Catherine? Hartnell does lots of very good acting with his hands. And Stephen gets to do. I think this is a great episode for Purves. Oh, and this is Ian Frost, who only died last year. He'd moved to America, as has Eileen Helsby, who's in the later episodes, and he did one-man shows in America, was gainfully employed as an actor there, but on the stage and doing the one-man show circuit. And he turns up as a Draconian in Frontier in Space. But yes, as I say, the cast of the Ark all stuck around well into this century. I mean, it's too late now, sadly, to have made the fully crewed documentary with surviving cast and crew that we could have done even 10 years ago. So that's a shame. Purves can really handle this. In fact, actually, I mean, part of what makes you side with Purves is that he's much better at this courtroom drama stuff than Inigo Jackson is. And I do really like the philosophy of this, the nature of man. Even at this day and age, you fear the unknown like everyone else before you. And Stephen is sweating. Look at that, because he's got the cold as well. But I like the idea of, it's not just that we've given them the cold, but because they're immune to the cold, it's affecting them to such a deadly extent. And I think that's a really smart science fiction idea. I mean, it does mean that every death on this is essentially because the TARDIS doesn't have a quarantine in it. But I think that is a really intelligent, and I think a far more ambitiously intelligent application of the series format than as we've yet seen. And if you see the two Guardians here who mostly speak, there's a male and a female. Paul Greenhalgh I spoke to on the phone when I was preparing for the commentary, because he was a friend of Anthony Keach, who's an actor who's been who's a Doctor Who fan, whose sister was a dresser on Doctor Who in the 60s. But Tony's been around years, and he's done some big finishes, and he's a lovely guy and a good actor. But he knew Paul, and Paul was the best friend of here's one. Paul was the best friend of Dame Diana Rigg. And in fact, Mark Gatiss contacted me and said, "Oh, did you know Diana Rigg's best mate was in the Ark? You should interview him." And I said, "I did speak to him on the phone in prep for the commentary." And I was kind of like, "So, I've kind of ticked him off the list, but of course I should have given him a call and said, actually, can we do an interview in person? I'll record you and blah blah blah." And for years he causes slightly confusion because one of the kids in Wartime, the Sergeant Benton spin-off, is also called Paul Greenhalgh, and you usually can't have two actors with the same name, but it does because of equity rules and blah blah blah. Well, that doesn't work anymore because equities doesn't have the monopoly, but also it doesn't count for kids. But anyway, so Paul Greenhalgh and Stephanie Heasem are the two in that. It's quite well done. You've got this whole crowd going, "Hey, no!" But the ones that get actual lines and will have been there for the whole of rehearsals, you sequester two actors amongst the walk-ons, so they'd have rehearsed all week, and then the walk-ons would have come in on the last day, so they get most of the stuff. And Paul told me about the sign language, and that they weren't given any sort of clue what they should do. They just had to sort of make it up. But yeah, Paul was great friends with Dame Diana Rigg, but also hung around in a gang of, I think there's a load of them who hang around in Kensington. Vernon Dobcheff, the scientist, Peter Benson Bohr, and Neil Dalgleish Damon from Arc of Infinity. I think they were all sort of good mates who hung around. And John Gorrie, director of The Keys of Marinus. And this I think dates it slightly, is that it's got this really intelligent, sort of even-handed approach to, how mankind behaves. But maybe this is deliberate, but it does seem a little bit simplistic. Go, well, it was bad for a bit, but now it's really bad because one of the humans has died. But maybe that's deliberate. I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt. I do feel that it's because it's the 60s. There is a certain, well, that's how the drama works, is that it's not great when the beetle lizards are dying, but the portly beetle lizards are dying. I think the monoids are great, but when a human dies, that's when we're really. It's funny, isn't it, that the bars have sort of see-through plastic sheeting that you can see in, because this is such good quality. Actually, prison bars don't have that, so why does it need the plastic sheeting? But anyway, though, you'd have thought that wasn't helpful for the lighting and the shooting of it either. Maybe it's their attempt to make it slightly futuristic, but. But the other speaking, I have a connection with both of the first and second Guardian in the crowd, because the Lady Guardian, and it's clever, isn't it, that they have one female, one male, so you can differentiate between two and give different voices, is Stephanie Heasem, who has never been interviewed about Doctor Who, but she does actually have my VHS of the Ark. Now, it's not my original one that had the damage to it, because I think that was a Yashima tape, but at some point I think I got maybe a slightly better quality one. But I always had good quality. But for some reason, it was on a tape with image of the Fendal. The way that it ended up, I got some E195s, which were brilliant because they fitted 8 episodes on. Sorry, there was a slight pause there because it's very windy outside. I hope that's what it is. I was friends with a guy called Asa at university, and we did loads of plays together. He did drama with me, and he was a real mate. And his mate Bruno, and there was a sort of a public school coterie, and I think Asa had been to school with Shane Rimmer's son, so he said, "Oh, I know a guy whose dad was in Thunderbirds and Doctor Who, Shane Rimmer." But then Bruno came round, and I think they saw my Doctor Who videos, and I got chatting to him anyway. Oh yeah, my mum used to be an actress, and she was in Doctor Who. And he said it's the only thing she was in. She was in Adamant Lives as well. It's the only thing she was in that she refuses to talk about. And I never quite got to the bottom of that. But anyway, I lent Bruno my copy of the Ark to take home so that his mum could watch it. And university being what it was, we sort of lost track, and I never got it back. And by that time, Doctor Who stories were coming out on VHS and stuff, and so I wasn't too worried about losing stuff because I'd watched everything a million times and I knew I could get copies again and whatever. I mean, I definitely intended to get it back, but life being what it was. But anyway, so I don't know if it's still there, but my copy of the Ark, and rather weirdly, my copy of Image of the Fendal, went to Heatham Towers. She'd become an antiques dealer, and I think she's still around. But Ben Jolly, who's a great people finder, has done a bit of looking. But I didn't pursue it with Bruno to try and get an interview with his mum, because he said she'd never wanted to talk about Doctor Who, and she'd given up acting, as I say, and become an antiques lady. But obviously done well enough to send Bruno to some public school where Acer had gone, and he went to a posh place. Anyway, this is good. This is great stuff. So that's my two stories about the two speaking but unnamed guardians in episode 2 of the Ark. This is the stuff you listen to. You don't get this with the other podcasts where people have interesting conversations and witty repartee. Instead you have a monologue of lame and name dropping here in Hadoke Towers. I love William Hartnell in this. I think he's great. Now, Baku is an interesting character. Because he's not in he's not in this segment. This is Ian Frost's character. He's not in this segment in the book. He opens a door, I think, in the next segment. He's one of the captured rebels. And so I remember when I was reading the book and trying to work out who was who and seeing the lists of the actors, I was really quite surprised that this Baku sort of comes in and out of nowhere and doesn't really do anything, because I think, does the Doctor advocate for Stephen in the? Oh no, Zentos carries out the prosecution. That's right, Zentos carries out the prosecution, so that Baku is not needed. But anyway, they use the name, but for a different character in the book. And I love this montage. And actually, in the book, I mean, the book of the Ark is well worth reading, because I think it does add a lot of extra dimensions and a lot of extra characters. And there are lovely little sort of subplots or vignettes involving different characters. And this is very good. The relationship that the Doctor has with his monoid friend in the book is even better. And I suppose in this is supposed to suggest that the monoids are more intelligent. I mean, we've even had it with the Ood, haven't we? The sort of willing servitor class, and the idea that people might be happy servants is a quite a supremacist and colonialist view, isn't it? And I mean, we could even get to that in terms of male and female dynamics as well, in that women were expected to, carry out certain duties, and there are some women from my mother's generation who I know believe that the world was a better place then, when women were perfectly happy to do the sort of domesticity stuff. Men went out and worked, and everybody knew their place, and blah blah blah. And so that was very much, the norm here. Even some quite sort of strong-willed and forthright women I know from the 60s still had to did all the cooking and cleaning while husband went out to the pub and all of that. I mean, it's extraordinary, let alone in some more sort of traditional setups. So the idea that there would be a group of people or lizards who would be quite happy doing this stuff is not as controversial. It's not controversial then. It's actually a perfectly normal seeming setup for a story that to then buck that. Now, whether that therefore speaks to our attitudes about, as I say, servitude and superiority, and some people being better suited to roles than others, I think is interesting. But I don't think we need to get too diverted from the intelligence of the story by that, because it's working within the parameters of the 1960s and what was sort of understood to be the case then, and we can't blame it for that. And I think what it's trying to do is at least look at what, why. Well, we'll talk about it when we get to episodes 3 and 4, because obviously the monoids end up not being happy with the situation. But here they seem to be rubbing along quite nicely with the humans. And is the idea that actually they're just waiting for their moment, or is it that, there's some nationalist monoids who take advantage of the weakness? But anyway, I think the dynamic is quite interesting. I love the fact that of all of the people in the story, as so often, the Doctor's very chatty with the monoid and doesn't talk down to him and doesn't patronise him. Hartnell's great in this, I think, and it's a good episode for him to be doing doctory stuff. And Jodo is very enthusiastic, isn't she? You can see that she has a wonderful energy. I think sometimes she's, as has been said in the comments, she's written to be a bit daft. So there's Stephanie Heesam. You can see her next to William Hartnell. She's the person, and Zentos I consider to be a bit of a Joseph Willow in The Awakening, a sort of a baddie who never quite gets his moment of retribution. The Earth has been destroyed. Look at that. I think that's a brilliant effect. Again, that feels really grown up and sophisticated for Doctor Who at this period, to have the Earth actually be destroyed in front of us. That feels like Doctor Who is doing something awesome and epic within a story that is, quite an ordinary, curing of a, because there's no amazing, the curing of the plague. It doesn't happen because of any sort of clever bit of science that has been part of the running story. It's just the Doctor does a few things and then they come up with the cure. There would have been a way to work that into the story, that it may be tied in with something that we had as part of the storytelling, that the cure was apposite or a metaphor or somehow tied in with the monoids or something, but instead it's not. It's just, we look for ages and then we come up with a cure, and everybody waving goodbye is very sort of 60s, and it's a little bit Famous Five, isn't it, or whatever. But I like what he says, that Zentos doesn't get punished, but the Doctor gives him a bit of a lesson and says, now listen, this is, you've got to not be so judgmental. You've got to go forward with understanding and all of that. And I quite like that. And there is a sort of certain element of, there's a certain philosophical edge to the story, and that's great. I mean, that monoid must have had to have stayed frozen for ages. The fact that he's still in shot when the TARDIS departs, I think, is again the director going, let's try and be as ambitious with this visual as we can. That jungle still looks great. I think visually this is really, really strong stuff. I mean, it would have been quite bold if they'd just had the TARDIS then come back, and as it came back, some of the leaves had fallen off the jungle, or they changed colour, or whatever. But anyway, this is a great coup de théâtre, if you like. We have the TARDIS has arrived back in the same place. Which and why might it not? I think that's perfectly acceptable. But yes, it's arrived in the same place, but at a different time. What a great use of the series format. But we don't know it's arrived at a different time. Yes, and I'm always slightly, why is she shouting for Baku? All Baku has done is act as prosecutor against Stephen. What about Maniac? He's the nice one. Call for Roy Spencer. Why are you calling for Baku? I don't understand that. Maybe it's because she knows that in the book version he's actually in this time period. This is one of the great Doctor Who cliffhangers. This could only exist and make sense within the confines of this story. This has been set up beautifully, and it is a nice idea that they'd be building the statue of a man. And then look at that. That says so much that something has gone wrong. It's something to do with the monoids, and we've travelled forward in time. It's an absolutely terrific cliffhanger, one of the greatest Doctor Who cliffhangers, I would argue, of all time. Some beautiful film work in that, some great philosophical scripting, some wonderful visuals, that wonderful crane, a great sense of size, and with Ian Frost's pretty good. Michael Sheard, I mean, I think is clearly already a good, underplayed, decent performer. But yeah, it's not one that you will come. None of the guest cast would you be sort of nominating if you were to do the season 3 Oscars for best guest actor. I think you would pretty quickly dispense with the Ark, but on all other scores, I think it counts pretty highly. And I love the sheer amount of monoid action that we get. I love them. I don't know why people don't think they look good. I think they look great, and I think having biped lizards with hair, bowl haircuts on a futuristic space thing or in front of the jungle, and the fact that they're boldly sort of placed there, I think is a great Doctor Who image, and you don't get it that often in the 60s. And I think having organic creatures on a futuristic set, and then actually seeing them in the jungle as well, where they sort of fit in slightly more, I think is wonderful. But I noticed that they have the one collapsing when it's by the TARDIS, don't they? And there's the brilliant shot of the monoid with the elephant. I love the shot of the monoid looking after the elephant and taking samples from the different jungle creatures. I think there's a great Doctor Who sort of dissonance there. The coupling of the strange, weird alien with quite funky Earth animals as well is a brilliant image that is so Doctor Who that you can only really have in Doctor Who. That it's really pleasing. I think really pleasing. But my favourite thing is going to be, without question, despite the fact I love that imagery. And that single shot of the monoid and the elephant, I think you could hang in the Doctor Who art gallery. I think it's a great episode for the Doctor. I love the Doctor's rapport with Dodo. I think Peter Purves, acquits himself extremely well in the courtroom scenes. It's great. It's a great one for the regulars. I like the Doctor and his relationship with his monoid friend. I like the Doctor and the way that he treats Dodo, and I love his reaction to Dodo crying, where Hartnell doesn't quite know what to do, but Hartnell the actor knows exactly what to do, and it's the Doctor that doesn't know what to do, and Hartnell the actor, I think, plays that absolutely perfectly. He knows exactly what he's doing, but it's only, I'm afraid, and I'd love to go around the houses and tease you and go, oh, which way is he gonna go? Which way does Toby swing when it comes to episode 2 of the Ark? It's obviously going to be one of the greatest cliffhangers in all of Doctor Who's history. And if Mark Aldridge doesn't agree, then I'm going to serve him a draught of sparkling cyanide.
So for episode 2, again, I guess it's a slight cheat, but my choice of my favourite thing is the statue becoming a monoid. So that we're set up really, really nicely with the fact that we are expecting this to be a human. We're told it's going to be a human. But again, it sort of stands for something else. It stands for the fact that this is a really nicely structured serial. So the fact that it's a monoid statue is a really great cliffhanger, because it tells us, first of all, that the monoids seem to have taken over. They're now in charge. But also, that jump in time, which I think is so exciting and so rarely done, certainly in this era of the show. So I absolutely love that. And it reminds me a lot of stories like The Time Meddler, where around this time, they're just pushing the boundaries and saying, actually, maybe we could do something with this concept that's more than just the Doctor and his companions dropping in on a period of history, or dropping into some sort of spaceship or alien world, getting involved in what's happening, and then jumping back into the TARDIS. I love that this is starting to say, well, actually, we've got a time machine. We might be able to do something a little bit more interesting here.
Absolutely, although I would, with caution, say that's as far as I would ever want to take it. I like what they do in Face of Evil as well. I think jumping forward in time or visiting somewhere you've been before is interesting. Travelling backwards and forwards in time within a story, I think, makes the whole format of the show fall apart. And I'm not a fan of when Doctor Who does that. But to do this, and to do this in this period of the show's history, I think is absolutely magnificent, because it's just enough to feel totally fresh. I think it's really bold for this period, and I think season 3 is very bold and very innovative, and I don't think it gets enough credit for that. I think it really is pushing the boundaries of what the show could possibly be. Now, it doesn't always work. I would definitely agree with that, but I wonder if season 2 had done a bit more of this sort of thing with that TARDIS crew, whether I think we might have had a truly golden period in the show's second season, where I think it's a bit more traditional. I love it, and there's not a story I don't like, but I think season 3 is much more innovative and has much more ambition about what could be done with Doctor Who, and I think Wiles and Tosh are a really, really interesting combination of story editor and producer who don't get enough time to flourish, really, and I think who's the curtailing of their reign was, I think, to the show's detriment. Much as I think Innes Lloyd and Jerry Davis have a very smart view of what to do with the show, they do make it a bit more traditional. I think the program loses some of its weirdness and strangeness as we emerge from the Wiles and Tosh era. It never quite regains, really, the odd single story aside. I don't think Doctor Who's ever quite as weird again post Tosh and Wiles, because it didn't want to be. But it was a weird show when it began, and it stopped being weird. And maybe it couldn't handle being weird all the time, and it needed to be a bit more traditional and straightforward. But anyway, I love the arc. I love the cliffhanger for episode 2. I love the fact that, I mean, some listeners may think that I've got 2 points here, because I could have got the point. I think I'm not always generous to myself, that I think we were kind of in the same ballpark last week, even though I didn't specifically mention the elephant. It was a conduit for Mark to lead into what director Michael Imison is doing. And now I'm definitely bang on with the cliffhanger and the statue being a monoid, which, of course, enables us to also talk about the time jump. But it's specifically the cliffhanger that I mentioned, and Mark did too. So I'm 2 points, maybe 1.5, maybe 1.25, but certainly the first half of the arc I've done very well indeed. Now, as viewers of the arc will know, it could all go tits up in parts 3 and 4, but let us see. That may set some time in the future, not the many generations that this particular story jumps, but things will be different in the next instalment. The same, fortunately, for budget reasons. It's going to look the same, but it's going to have a different vibe. But that is all to be covered when we return in the return, the next episode of the arc, which will be in the same happy place, but in a very different happy time. So for now, goodbye. Thanks very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest, Mark Aldridge, who you can find on Blue Sky. Do check out his Agatha Christie-related work. I'm grateful to Mark and to the patrons who make this podcast possible, and they include Mia Murch, Chris Murphy, Paul Murphy, Andrew Nixon, Tom Neenan, Steve O'Brien, Neil O, Runar Brutig Olsen, Mark Trevor Owen, Russell Parker, Andy Parkinson, James Parsons, Phil Pascoe, Richard Patey, John Pettigrew, Steve Phillips, Shane Plays, Kitty Placati, Liam Price, Ian Radford, William Remmers, Paul Reynolds, Sean Reynolds, Richard Riley, Murray Robertson, Roger 1966, Alex Rowan, Ronin, Darren Rule, John Rumfit, Gavin Rymil, Paul Sarah, Mark Sandham, Tom Solinsky, Nick Salmond, Edward Salt, Samuel, no surname, Frank Shales, Nigel Sharp, Christopher Sharp, Jack Sharp, John Sheehan, Scott Sherritt, James Silk, Gavin Skinner, Darcy Smart, Dale Smith, David Smith, Giles Smith, Trevor Smith, Richard Smith, Andrew Snedden, the Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Taran Woodbeasts, and David Spencer. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. Well, I mean, we've got enough Smiths, but we can always have some more if you would like your name read out on the credits of Happy Times and Places. That is probably the least interesting of the material that you get if you are a patron at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. Paying patrons get access to bonus releases, exclusive material, including interviews from my archive and behind-the-scenes footage from the various DVD and Blu-ray shenanigans and convention doodahs that I get up to. All sorts of stuff there. Usually 3, sometimes 2 releases per week, but well in advance in terms of release schedule of these podcasts. Hopefully, it should be, if all things are according to plan, definitely 6 months in advance for Happy Times and Places, and a few editions in advance for Indefinable Magic and Too Much Information. And there's an exclusive podcast called Far Too Much Information and monthly AMAs. That is all at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. You can also contribute by going to kofi.com/Toby Hadoke. There's no monthly obligation there, but you get no bonuses. But it's a way of subsidising the arts, is the way that I like to see it. But you can subsidise without doing so financially by simply giving these 5 stars, a like and a subscribe everywhere that you digest them, and that includes on Apple, iTunes, Spotify and YouTube. Please go to all those places and give my algorithms a little tweak. I'm on social media at Hadoke Podcasts and at Toby Hadoke on Twitter, at Toby Hadoke or whatever it is on Blue Sky. The names seem a bit of a mouthful there, but you'll find me if you just type my name in. And I'm on Instagram at Toby.Hadoke, and I have a Facebook page as well. I'm not on TikTok or OnlyFans, and I know, I think that's appalling, and I should really, can you imagine me with an I might do one just for that would be funny, wouldn't it, if I had an OnlyFans? I would have no people, but it would just be me occasionally in a bra looking suggestively. Right, I'm going to do that. I've got too much to do. I can't now just do OnlyFans as a joke. Anyway, I don't have, sadly there's no OnlyFans, and the only TikTok I hear is of this biological frame of mind ticking away towards doomsday. But anyway, we crack on. Well, there we have it. So, I mean, I invoked the spectre of teaching Peter Purves how to use GarageBand in my previous instalment. He sent me an email which suggests to me he needs a little bit more help with it. So I've got to do a little bit more of that. I've also got a voicemail from Annika Wills and from John Levine. So never mind my name dropping of the first Guardian and second Guardian. I've got some companions to attend to, but isn't that fun that this is my life? I think I'm doing an appearance with John Levine soon, and that's maybe what he was. Well, no, I'm not doing an appearance. I think we're going to be at the same event. He will be making an appearance. I'm just there, as a fan, as I want to be there. And I don't know what Annika Wills wants. I have to take a run up to things like voice messages and things like that. As I get older, I get increasingly, I'm even reluctant to leave the house. And I think this is a sign of modern society. I increasingly kind of, if I get an email, I don't reply to it straight away sometimes. I sort of mark it as unread and go, I'm going to have to deal with that when I've got the headspace. It's just often replying to somebody saying, can you do this? Or hello? Or what's this? And I go, oh, I need to get in the right headspace. I think we're making ourselves less equipped to deal with the everyday. So yeah, if I get a voicemail now, I have to make sure that I'm in the right space to hear it. It's terrible. I'm falling apart. I'm only 51 and everything's broken, including my mental synapses. I don't know if that's got to, but I do hope they've got that sorted by the 57th segment in time. Maybe they spend so much sorting out our capacity to do the everyday and ensuring that we get over ourselves that they forget how to make clothes. There we go. I've made it work. Right. Better go and pluck up the courage to listen to a voicemail. Pathetic. Oh, did you hear that? That was the wind. This is why I don't like going outside. The weather is turning against us. It's not really. I'm just very lazy. But if I'm not careful, if I don't force myself, I might end up being a prisoner in my own home. So I have to, thank God for the dog, I have to take him out. But no, the wind is real. I've got to literally batten down the hatches. You probably didn't hear that, but it's where I'm in a soundproof booth, and even I heard the rattling windows there, because it's been raining cats and dogs. Not cats and dogs, but you know what I mean. It's been raining. The weather has been inclement. Anyway, that's pointless. But all of this last bit is always pointless. That's the whole point of it.